Hi friends, welcome back. This is our final lesson on the Book of Ruth. As we close out this amazing story from the Book of Ruth, I hope that you have been able to glean some great lessons for your own life. You know, together with Naomi, we've walked a path with her of heartbreak and of loss, of humiliation and hopelessness. And then we got to see Ruth respond to Naomi with amazing love and kindness and commitment. I mean, we may have asked, what kind of love is this from Ruth to set aside her own best interests for Naomi? Well, we've also joined Ruth on this bold path to care for Naomi, to take initiative. She approached Boaz in the field. She proposed marriage to him. She asked him to be a levirate and a kinsman redeemer. All of these things were to care for Naomi. The story had to swing through Bethlehem, where we watched Boaz work legally to provide as a levirate and a kinsman redeemer in front of the crowd at Bethlehem. And Boaz stood up to the expectations of his own culture, of the villagers, as he married a foreigner, a Moabite woman. And in doing so, he brought new hope for Naomi. What we can learn from Boaz through this story is what his culture found to be worthless, he found to have great value. That's a pretty amazing lesson in itself. What some consider worthless can actually be of greatest value. And through it all, we see the hand of God working behind the scenes. Naomi accused him of abandoning her, of turning his back on her. She assumed that he, like her culture, found her worthless. But as we come to the end of the story, we see that God never left her. He didn't find her worthless. He found her of great value and poured his love into her. You know, I've talked a lot about that Hebrew word chesed and how we don't fully understand its meaning of that kindness and love and commitment and unending compassion. And we don't have a word for that. All those words don't fully describe what chesed means. But as I've said many times, I think the book of Ruth illustrates for us what chesed looks like from God and from God's people. So join me. We'll pick up the story in chapter 4 at verse 14. Then the women of the town said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord, who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child be famous in Israel." Now, if you remember, those women greeted Naomi at the end of chapter 1 when she returned to Bethlehem. They barely recognized her. They asked, could this be Naomi? They could see the brokenness and the pain in her, the hopelessness. And now these same women have a chance to say new words to Naomi. And these are words of hope and of life. So these women close out our story with a blessing. They remind Naomi the Lord has not left her, but has provided her with more than she could ever ask or think. Blessed be the Lord, and he has done this great work, and we must tell the story. It seems to be what the women are saying to Naomi. Can you imagine what a joyous time that was? Again, I remind you that this story took place during the time of the Judges, when many Israelites had left God to seek out their own ways and to do things the way they wanted to do them. This is a call to worship the Lord for the great things that he has done and is doing. And this is a great opportunity to tell of his works and of his love. So these women do not bypass this opportunity to do so. So the women first bless God, and then they turn to Naomi. And we'll read that in verse 15. We will look here at what the women have to say about this newborn child. May he restore your youth and care for you in your old age, for he is the son of your daughter-in-law who loves you and has been better to you than 7 sons. So the women remind Naomi that this son will take care of her in her old age. He really is a redeemer for her. He will be a rescuer, a protector for her. And the women remind her that Naomi is better off with Ruth than with 7 sons. Now, in the Hebrew culture, that number 7 was what they considered to be a perfect number, a number of perfection. And so these women are saying to Naomi that Ruth is better than the perfect number of sons. That's pretty amazing. And what a contrast it is to Naomi's lament. You remember when she came back to Bethlehem, she said, coming back empty, even though Ruth was beside her. Now these women are reminding Naomi that she didn't return empty, but she came with Ruth. Remember that at that time, older women depended on their sons to take care of them in their old age. The sons were to protect them from exploitation and violence, to provide fairness and justice for them, to stand up for their rights. And the sons preserved their father's name, kept the legacy going forward. Ruth did all of those things, and at great cost to herself. She was in a culture that denied her a voice, gave her no legal standing, really considered her useless. And yet we see in our story, look how things have changed since chapter 1. So let's continue, verse 16. Naomi took the baby and cuddled him to her breast, and she cared for him as if he were her own. In a sense, both Ruth and Boaz served as leverets to Naomi in providing the son to her. And so that's why now it says it was like her own son, her own child, because of that leveret piece. So we see that Ruth makes the ultimate love sacrifice in allowing Naomi to help raise this child. By giving her son to Naomi, Ruth reverses Naomi's emptiness. Now, I am quite certain that Ruth didn't just disappear from the scene, and Naomi was in charge of raising this child. But legally, Naomi could claim this child as part of her family heritage, and she would be deeply involved in raising this son. I remember hearing when I was a young mother how important it was to keep my children's love cup full. Naomi's love cup has been dry as a bone, and now God is pouring into her love and mercy and kindness. The emptiness is going away. Again, that's the nature of God. He is loving and merciful and kind and abundant. She's being filled to overflowing. He is not fickle and vindictive like false gods. And this is a pretty valuable lesson in that time to people who were running after false gods. And yet today it's a pretty valuable lesson because we are surrounded by false gods. They may not have names like Chemosh or Zeus or Apollos, but today they can be power, they can be finances, they can be networking or people that we know. When we trust those to fill us, to give us our worth, we'll find out that those gods of today are pretty fickle and vindictive as well. Okay, we just have a couple of loose ends to tie up in our story, so let's continue. The neighbor women said, "Now at last Naomi has a son again," and they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. This was a little secret that has had a couple of hints, but now it comes out. So the family line that Ruth and Boaz have rescued, we now learn, is the family line of King David. And as we look forward into the bigger picture of the family line of Jesus, God did not discard Naomi. He did not turn his back on her. Instead, he prepared her for a crucial kingdom mission in this restoring a family. As I said earlier, Naomi will be helping to teach Obed. And what do you think he's going to teach her about God's chesed? What she herself has experienced from God, from Ruth, from Boaz, she will be able to teach those things to Obed. We are told in Scripture that David was a man after God's heart. And he knew something of the nature of God's heart from his very own family line, from Jesse, from Obed, back to Naomi, from Boaz and Ruth. They probably didn't know him personally, but what they passed on in that family line affected David. And even beyond that story of Ruth and Boaz and Naomi and even King David, there's even a bigger picture. And God is continuing his plans and purposes for the entire world, in part through the selfless acts of these people that we have met in the book of Ruth. So let's close it out, 18 through 22. Now these are the descendants of Perez. Perez became the father of Hezron, Hezron of Ram, Ram of Amminadab, Amminadab of Nahshon, Nahshon of Salmon, Salmon of Boaz, Boaz of Obed, Obed of Jesse, and Jesse of David. I spent a lot of time in the last lesson reviewing the story behind Perez. He was born of a troubled Levirate union, and yet here he is heading up the line of David. And of course, all of them in this line were ancestors of Jesus. So we have spent a lot of time with our three main characters in this story, Naomi and Ruth and Boaz, and followed their actions and their motivations. Interestingly, only Naomi changes in the story. Both Ruth and Boaz continue in their understanding of who the Lord is and how they will treat other people because of that. They have committed themselves to God, and their actions reflect their understanding of God's love for them and for others. And they did not waver, just like God doesn't waver in showing kindness. Naomi changed from in the beginning of the story, where she knew of God, but she didn't know him very well. And we see that when she accused him of turning his back on her, of causing this disappointment and bitterness, of making her unworthy in her own culture. But by the end of the story, we see through Ruth and Boaz's just determination, in a sense, to show her kindness, she comes to experience God's love in a fresh way. In the end, she was given the incredible gift of a son and being in the very lineage of King David himself. So the book of Ruth begins with a lineage. Abimelech, Mahlon, Chilion, starts with a family, and it ends with a genealogy, again, with a family. In the end, we see a bigger picture of God's plan to restore Israel through a godly king, King David, and the even bigger story of God's plan to restore humans through Jesus, the ultimate king. So our story comes full circle. There is so much in this story about God's love and his ultimate plan for his people. Thank you for joining me, and I really hope that this has given you some new ideas to think about, and maybe a fresh awareness of God's love and God's purposes that span from early times even clear till today. May God reveal this precious chesed, this love and grace and commitment and kindness, and may your heart be open to his working in your lives. Thank you again for joining me. God bless.